like to do is to introduce the Lord Mayor, Councillor Anna Reynolds, who will kick the evening off.
Thank you so much, and welcome to Town Hall, Hobart Town Hall. And in recognition of the deep history and culture of this place, I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which the City of Hobart was built. I'd like to acknowledge their determination and resilience of the Palawa people of Tasmania, who have survived invasion and dispossession and continue to maintain their identity, culture and rights. So on behalf of everyone at the City of Hobart, I am very happy to welcome you here and that you're able to be part of this really interesting forum. Art is too important not to share, and in my view, great cities are sharing cities. Where there's a sharing culture of art and culture in a city, that a city is a caring place, I think they are the great cities of the world. They're actually the distinctive cities. There's a lot of focus of creative cities right around the country, right around the world, but I think that element of sharing, whether it's through public art, whether it's through culture, whether it's through a caring city in terms of social cohesion, I think they're the really standout cities of the world, and it's that sharing element. And in my view, public art is all about sharing art. And we know that, the City of Hobart is very keen, and we know that our residents are very keen to see more public art. It came out very strongly as a theme in our city visioning process. But we also know that there isn't necessarily a deep expertise and understanding of all of the processes of public art, and that there is a different skill set required to really shine in the area of public art. And so we're really keen to help facilitate, if we can, an opportunity for artists to learn more about best practice in this field, learn from other artists that are really thinking deeply about public art. And this is all part of the work that Jude, Abell and others in the public art team have been engaged in finishing our Public Art Framework 2019, which we signed off on, I think it was the last meeting of the year last year. And there's some really exciting opportunities for the staff and the community to take projects forward under that strategy that the Council has now signed off on. So this is all part of the vision stemming from that strategy. So I now have the honour of introducing our keynote speaker, Lynda Roberts, who is the Principal of Public Assembly, and that's a collaborative studio exploring the social dynamics of public space. Between 2014 and 2017, Lynda was the Senior Public Art Program Manager at the City of Melbourne, where she developed Melbourne's Public Art Framework and a suite of new projects including test sites and the Biennial Lab. Lynda currently supports emerging practitioners as the Senior Coordinator of RMIT Creative, and she's also a PhD candidate at the Deakin University investigating how we make art public. So we're really thrilled to have Lynda here to speak to us, and please make Lynda feel welcome.
Great. There we go. Cool. Hi everyone, and thank you for the warm welcome and invitation from the City of Hobart to speak tonight and to share my experiences of test sites while I was at the City of Melbourne. This was a program that I initiated while I was Senior Program Manager back in 2014 to 17. So to talk about public art in the context of Melbourne requires first acknowledging the Eastern Kulin Nations, on whose stolen lands the city's built. There's much work to be done to recognise the city's complex history and to put First Nations first. This responsibility extends to public art as a creative practice that continues a long history of sharing stories of and through place. Public space is also inherently political. It's a vital conduit of exchange that often asks unresolvable questions that afford an ongoing reimagining of who we are as a society. An open and accessible public space is fundamental for a robust democracy. The ongoing contestation of ideas is arguably what makes space public. And it's this tension, for those that already practice in this field, would already know, that makes working in this field, both as an artist and an arts administrator, both exciting and really challenging. And I'm sure we all know what that feels like. So to understand how test sites came to be within this context, we need to go back to the policies that seeded it. And it starts with Melbourne and, like Hobart, defining itself as a creative city. So we're going to start from the beginning, in a way, but public art is an integral part of the city's identity. From Ron Robinson's Swan's Vault, which heralded the beginning of the city's support for contemporary art practices back in the late 1970s, to Melbourne's temporary laneway commissions and tactical street art, activating the overlooked spaces of the city. But obviously creativity is clearly more than the arts. The economic impact of the arts and culture in Victoria adds around $6.1 billion to the state economy. And investing in our creative identity was seen to yield substantial returns for locals and visitors. And to sustain this creative pulse, the City of Melbourne needed to redefine the lines between creative practice and urban spaces. The Melbourne Arts Strategy boldly placed artists at the centre of Melbourne's aspirations as a creative city, inverting the typical objective of what can the artist do for the city to what can the city do for artists. It acknowledged art couldn't be made without the conditions to nurture it, and this elevated the arts and the creative process politically. A key role for the city was to enable rather than control, engage rather than duplicate. It looked to find the gaps between the rich cultural ecology that already existed in Melbourne to operate. At the same time, Melbourne was and continues to grow at an exponential rate, and with this comes a marked increase in the demand of public space. This makes it a challenging arena to operate in as an artist, as we all know, with tightening regulations, multiple stakeholders engaged in the management and use of space. These ideas anchored the public art framework and subsequently the Test Sites program. When tasked with developing the public art framework, we needed to ask difficult questions about how we best use what we have. How could Melbourne's public realm support social, experimental and artist-led practices? How does the city make space for diverse voices, seeding cultural vibrancy through artistic experimentation? How do we support artists to move out of the gallery, which is where they retreat to, into the studio, and use the city instead as their studio? What are the shifts in productions that a local authority like City of Melbourne need to make within this increasingly contested field? When Melbourne had once led the way with programs like Melbourne Laneways Commissions that had opened up interstitial spaces to new practitioners, who in turn brought new narratives and readings of the city, developing works in the public realm had become too hard, especially for emerging artists, with the raft of new regulations and local laws that had been brought in around the same time as the Occupy movement in about 2011. This meant the same names kept applying and winning commissions. While at Public Art Melbourne, my colleagues, advisors and I recognised the City of Melbourne as a local authority was in a unique position to make space for artists to work in the public domain. To do this, we needed to think and do things differently. Through test sites, we sought opportunities within the regulatory systems of council to enable artists to temporarily intervene and play within the fabric of the city grid. It looked towards Melbourne's bottom-up activities like street art, which represented an engaged and self-motivated creative citizenry that took risks in the public realm for their art, and the iterative nature of artist laboratories to develop temporary public art. This approach drew on my personal experience as a public artist and a lab co-facilitator, coupled with support from the Public Art Advisory Panel, who championed contemporary and experimental methodologies. And I now understand on reflection at the time that I now understand this was probably quite an audacious shift for a local government authority to make, with all of its public accountability. But as creative expert Ken Robbins says, if you're not prepared to take a risk, then don't expect innovation. The way the city delivered test sites was inspired by the work of Berlin-based artist Fabian Nisch, who used film production companies to create large-scale temporary works that intervene and play with the fabric of the city, such as this large-scale pyrotechnic work release at the new National Gallery in Berlin. What was inspiring about his work was the agency of an artist finding leverage points within an existing system and harnessing the methodologies of another creative industry who operated in public space. With Fabian's work, documentation also became the artwork as well as the action. So playing with reality and fiction and then thinking about the city as a movie set. So back in Melbourne, we discovered that the city also privileged filming as an economic driver. And with a dedicated filming permits team that could fast-track approvals for ambitious productions in the public realm. We realised if an artist had a camera in their hand, that they too could harness the filming permit process. And with this in mind, test sites invited artists to experiment with Melbourne's central city as an expanded film studio with seed funding, advice and support. Responsiveness was at the program's core. For artists to respond in situ to Melbourne's unique spaces like Astra Howard with her scene capture vehicle that overlaid and reinterpreted existing street art. Responsiveness was also embedded in the program's quick response structure, so that artists did not have to wait a year or more to try an idea. This meant taking the program's financial management to an external organisation to auspice and provide an agile funding structure to provide things like petty cash, a simple thing like petty cash which artists need. Something that the city's existing financial structures were unable to achieve. Test sites funding was small, but it was sufficient for an artist to cover their wages and materials to test their idea over a 24-hour period in the city. With the funding being small and less onerous, there was less pressure from the city for the outcome to succeed. And this meant we could start to redefine what success was, as long as the artist had gained insights and built capacity to work again in the public realm. Test sites was not about just funding. The council also supported artists with one-day workshops with leading local and international practitioners. These explored how artists could negotiate both permitting and production, but also creative development. This built capacity for artists to be ambitious with their ideas both now and into the future. These one-day workshops were located both inside and outside beyond the studio. Here with Stephen Rao at Testing Grounds as part of Yirramboi, Melbourne's First Nations Festival, exploring the social and relational negotiations of a public practice from a First Nations perspective. The collaboration with Yirramboi extended to supporting 3 artists as part of Barryanabal, a day-long First Nations takeover of Melbourne's streets and laneways. Here, Baden Hitchcock, a performer and choreographer, facilitated a reenactment and reinterpretation of the frescoes of Howitt's Rescue of King that surrounded the Burke and Wills monument on Swanson Street through a site-specific and participatory audio broadcast, opening up conversation about the complexities of decolonising significant colonial narratives. As the program prioritised chance art encounters by not announcing test site locations, it took the pressure off artists to deliver an outcome. It offered tangible experiences which connected citizens to each other and to ourselves. It privileged the idea of disruption and making the city porous to new works and ideas. Roar Firatata Collective, a performance duo, developed performances responding to the narrow or vertical passageways of the city. Various people who encountered their work captured their experience on their socials, and we discovered a number of YouTube and Insta posts about their project. And this shifted the documentation from one to multiple perspectives, and we discovered this was a key platform for measuring public engagement. While test sites momentarily transformed people's experience of the city, we still needed to be accountable to our ratepayers. So the key public outcome was an online visual essay on Instagram as a mediated experience, and really looking at this idea of social media as another public space. It gained over 130,000 unique online engagements, and test sites provided a platform to showcase artists locally and to the world through mobile media. In hindsight, test sites had the potential to reform the internal administration processes within the city and to expand the field of possibility with each iteration. Much change was still needed. Despite the open-ended brief and providing support for artists, we needed to think and act more like a film production company and to be truly agile and responsive to artists' needs. And I am also mindful that a film production comes with substantial budgets, and we need to benchmark public art against other creative industries who intervene in the public realm as well. There was a tendency to fall back to the habitual modes of operation with application forms and processes that were required to connect back to the systems of City of Melbourne. And to be honest, most of the ideas we received did not have the complexity and scale that required a filming permit. Nicole Breeden's Monotone Rainbow did get close, and she pushed the test sites program to be more than just a full-scale test, but also preliminary site research and development. This enabled her to successfully apply for a larger grant, leveraging off other funding sources within council and beyond. Between 2014 and 2017, test sites supported over 100 artists with workshops, developing and exploring ideas with experienced artist mentors, and supported 25 artists with seed funding and support to test their ideas. Of these projects, 5 test sites were successful in obtaining a larger annual arts grant from council to develop and present their ideas further. Test sites reconsidered artists' practices and their relationship to the city. In particular, it prefaced the value of creative process over outcome, tactical intervention over permanency, and the opening up of spaces for new practitioners to test new ideas. With our laneways full of street art and murals, test sites enabled other forms of experimental and performative public art to be cultivated. These opened up a dialogue with existing conditions while supporting artists to feel confident to work in the public realm. During test sites, I learned that the city needed to take risk out of the equation, find leverage points within the system, rework the process, build resilience and build capacity, be circumspect about disciplinary boundaries, test on site, and then test again at full scale, trouble existing ideas of what public art can be and do. And so since my time at the City of Melbourne, I've been embarking on a PhD, and I've been reflecting on my experience as both an artist, tactically responding to the city, and an operator working strategically within city systems. And I've developed a set of primers or tools for action to make art public. And for the last maybe 12, 18 months, I've been roaming the city in a mobile studio, asking fellow practitioners for their feedback, both inside the city but also out in the public realm, to develop these cards. And I've got a pack here tonight, and I'm looking forward to sharing these and hearing about your experiences during the breakout session. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynda. We were super excited to get Lynda over here, particularly for the Test Sites program, which has been an inspiration for us. And it'll be great. Lynda will be at the back at the end of the evening for you to have a great chat with her further about that. So I'll just try and organise myself, take off my MC hat and put on my presenter hat. So I'm next up. My name's Judith Abell. I should have done this before. I'm one of the public art coordinators for the City of Hobart and have been one of the people key in putting together our current public art framework, as Anna Reynolds mentioned. So I'll just swap over presentations and then we'll... Oops. Okay, so I've split my talk up into 3 parts. The first being just acknowledging that sense that Hobart City is changing, and in accordance so is our approach to public art. The second, just talking through our new public art framework. And the third, just talking a little about how we're here to help support artists making work in public space. So the city is changing, and so is our approach. Over the past 10 years, as most people know here, we've experienced a period of growth and change. And this is a series of markers in no particular order, but sort of reflect a difference that we've seen within the city. So Mona has opened in Greater Hobart, and there are now ongoing festivals in the City of Hobart that have been occurring every year since 2008. There's been a 150% increase in visitor numbers to Tasmania in the last 10 years, with the majority visiting the south of the state. That cultural tourism is a strong component of that visitation, and from the Tourism Tas stats, of the million visitors to the south of the state in 2017-2018, you can see that there's significant chunks of the people there who are visiting for a cultural reason, and this is not the full list. Is that okay? Yeah. And there's been a significant increase in development. So just in 2017 and 2018, there were 30 developments of a significant scale that were approved for construction in Hobart through the planning system. And as we know, Utah's recently moved to a city-centric model, which includes significant numbers of student residences. So the makeup of the city is changing in a range of different ways. And so in response, our approach to public art is changing as well. So our last public art strategy was very old. It was approved 15 years ago. And so in the last couple of years, we've been working on a new public art strategy. But before we get onto that, I'll just sort of talk about the kinds of things that we've been doing in the lead up to that, sort of from that last sort of strategy, but working on our own steam. So we've made a significant shift from static public artworks to platforms for changing content. So this is Georgia Hill here in front of her work, You're Here, and this is one of our Urban Art Walls program artworks. And I should say as well, this came out of the Creative Hobart strategy, which sits above our public art framework, and this talked about using the city as a platform, and obviously the walls are part of that. This is Soapbox in Mather's Place, and this is Elderhood, which is a project by Andrew Wilson. And so Soapbox is a series of 3 billboards that sit in Mather's Place and Criterion Lane, and they have changing content that's either artist-led or community-led, which basically is sort of about recognising that there's fantastic projects that are happening out there in community groups, and particularly, but also with artists, and to ask people if they want to put that up on the wall so that it gets another showing. So quite often there'll be an absolutely sensational project that happens within a particular group, and they'll have a great exhibition, but that will tend to be the reach. And so this gave a second opportunity for something where people will just see that in their day-to-day. And it also gave us a different format for art within the city. So instead of it being just a mural or a static 3-dimensional work, it could now be work which combined text and image and gave a platform for another art form. So it could be for a writer who wrote in prose or in poetry. And then at the end of 2018, we launched The Loop, which is a large LED screen which is in the front of the student housing in Elizabeth Street. And once again, a platform for changing content, this time on a kind of minute-by-minute basis. And once again, opening up so that, again, we're sort of easing open that idea of who can make public art in our spaces of the city, so that it be for people working with digital media of all forms. And at the moment, it's sort of, short film makers, student filmmakers. We're working on what that will look like in the next couple of years, but also thinking about how that kind of digital technology can then be utilised in a whole range of other kind of ways that create more sort of interactive kind of possibilities for it. And there's our much loved and much hated Signal Box program. which is probably one of our most democratic projects to date. So it's one that, from a 4-year-old child to a professional artist, if they wish, could be involved in and have some sense of kind of a small piece of ownership of the city through their creative output. And it's ridiculously popular whenever we've kind of opened it up. We're in a sort of in-between stage at this point, but we're looking to reopen it again and potentially repaint. We work with Urban Smart in Brisbane to do this because they have a fantastic model set up. And every time that we open it up, straight away, irrespective of people sometimes feeling uncomfortable with it because it's not always what people consider high art, that people love it, and straight away you've got a full plate of people doing work. And then we have a move from management on our part through to support and facilitation, and I guess sort of working with Vibrance, Johnny is here, has been one of the really kind of strong ways that we've done this over the last few years. So Johnny came to us and said, your urban art world program's great, but there's got a few problems with it, and there's a whole series of issues in terms of how comfortable street artists might be with putting up portfolio work, which may be illegal to the council, for just one example of it. And obviously the council is seen as the grey paint kind of master within the city, kind of cleaning everything off or painting it over. So people within the street art community don't love us in that respect. So how do we find a model that would then work so that we kind of have some opportunity to kind of hand back spaces for art making within the city and sort of move to a slightly hands-off process, but still take a lot of care and have a lot of involvement. So basically do all the things that we can do as a city in terms of having good relationships with building owners, because they're all on private buildings, but sitting to the kind of back seat and letting the street art community effectively kind of manage it through Vibrance, which Johnny and Roar and Freya work on. So they've gone through 2 festivals, and the second festival, Bide and Copes, led then to a new management program for Bide and Copes in the city, which looks at, rather than our guys going through with their cleaning materials and grey paint, we now have Vibrance look after that space and go through and remove any unwanted graffiti, essentially generally by kind of having new artwork over the top. There are permission walls in that space which allow for people who register to go and paint within specified times, and regularly now there are paint jams where it's then more of a social occasion which fills up the space. So, and this was particularly kind of moved to take a space which was uncared for within the city and really shift its feel, and people would know if you work through there regularly how it's really significantly changed that space. And Vibrance 2021 will be happening next year in February. And then we have increasing opportunities for temporary art projects. So Constance has their Open Stays program, which Rebecca will talk about a little more in one of her in her talk coming up. And these are predominantly coming about through our grant system. So that's available. I'll show the amounts that are available for small amounts of money or kind of medium grants for people, auspice, to be able to then make work that activates the city in some way through our Creative Hobart grants program. And then we have Hobart Current, which is a project which I'm not directly involved with, but it has a public art component. So we now have 10 artists who are chosen by our creative director, Rosie Dennis. And in September and October, there will be 8 artists who have work that will be shown in the Tasmanian Museum and Art Gallery, and 2 artists, Brigitte Oslands and Sarah Jane Pell, who have their work in public space. And increased opportunities for community engagement or input and participation. So Alex will talk a little bit, I think, about the Lenah Valley Retail Precinct upgrade. But this looks at a sort of process of building content for public artwork through working directly with community and gathering stories and translating them into public artworks through a new retail area. And increasing engagements with social and political ideas. So this is a very powerful work by Justy Phillips, The Yellow Line, which was completed in 2013 and was a collaboration with between the City of Hobart and the Tasmanian Gay and Lesbian Rights Group and the Rainbow Communities Tasmania. Again, with Two Islands project as well, this sense of engaging with sort of social and political ideas. So, you know, Franklin Square is one of those kind of tense spaces that has a very colonised kind of feel, but it has a whole other story going on. And how do you start to talk about that, and how can an artwork start to talk about that in public space? So, we have a new public art framework. Here it is, grab a copy if you're interested at the back. And this has been developed over the last couple of years. And what it does, I suppose, it builds on that sort of slightly finer sort of framework that we built up through all of those different transitions that we've been making. So this is the vision. So our public art program reflects Hobart's unique landscape and identity through innovative, publicly accessible works of art. The program provides opportunities for diverse creative practitioners to develop meaningful experiences for residents and visitors. And I guess that sort of key there is diverse, one of the keys out of that is diverse creative practitioners and what that might mean in the sort of fullest sense of diverse. These are the three guiding principles. So they are excellence, courage and connection. We know that excellence is a pretty problematic word, thank you Brandis, etc. But actually we still couldn't avoid using it, I don't think, and we feel like excellence is kind of the best that it can be in the context that the art is made. And so that might be excellence in process, excellence in engagement, for example. That it be courageous, like we can't do what we're doing without taking risks. And so it wouldn't make any sense to not have courage in the mix. And then connection is really kind of what pulls it all together. So if we're doing public art in public space, which the general public and ratepayers of Hobart don't get, love, engage with, are challenged by, then we've kind of missed the point. So they're the key things, and that's what we will continue to look for each of the new works that we do. And then these key directions, they're in our framework here in the middle of it. So, and again, in no particular order, they are inclusive, which is talking about art for and by everyone. Interactive, we're increasingly wanting to have public artworks within the city where you can engage with it directly and have some sort of effect. Quintessential, which I guess is probably where the heart of most of the public art that's been done in the city to date sits in some ways, especially the older stuff. So the work that's about sense of place, identity and nature, our natural environment. Expressive, which is building on the work that we've already done, but looking again at our city as a platform for creative expression. And experimental, which to some extent is what sort of stimulated us to have this sort of conversation tonight. So what might that look like? And we don't know exactly what it looks like yet, but we want to allow the opportunity, similarly to what Lynda did with the City of Melbourne, is to open the city up to be a place where you might experiment with ideas. And implicit in that, or explicit in terms of the way we talk about it, will be about the idea that you can fail. And that's entirely part of the process. How else could you experiment? So this is a very sort of boring slide, but I guess kind of what it talks about is that we have a really complex kind of process that comes about in a whole range of different ways for making public art. So there are sort of four key ways that art comes about. It either comes about because of something that evolves from us, from the public art team. Maybe it comes from a city division-led project, so something's happening in infrastructure projects somewhere in upgrade. It might come from a developer-led project, and that's sort of an area that we're sort of exploring and thinking about. And there's a lot of work that's also coming out of external interest groups. You know, all the work for Duck Mofo is one example, the work with Constance is another. And so what we've set out in the framework is just to understand what that process might be and how it might play through. This is only half the diagram. It goes from kind of what the trigger might be all the way through to how we look after the work and who looks after it. So, the last part is that we're here to support artists making art in public space. And I guess there's sort of three ways that you can kind of think about how that might happen. So one way, and the most traditional way, is that you submit an expression of interest for a major public art commission, and this is just an example of one that was a live expression of interest a couple of years back. So they're all advertised through as many kind of channels as we can use, and we regularly work with Arts Tasmania and use their public art newsletter, that artists are required to submit a written approach that also includes a portfolio and a statement of capacity, so there's no requirement for you to submit a pitch for an idea unpaid. And then generally artists are shortlisted, generally 3 shortlists, from that expression of interest and paid to produce a concept. The other way is that you could apply for a grant. So the grants opened a couple of days ago. Small grants to individuals are $1,000 to $5,000. Again, they must be auspiced for projects within the City of Hobart. Medium grants are $7,000 to $15,000, and that's for projects again within the City of Hobart. And we also have ongoing quick response grants, and the same as any other sort of system until the money runs out in the financial year. And they're open throughout for a maximum of $1,000. And again, that's for kind of to assist with works within the City of Hobart, and that could be easily a kind of a test of an idea. You can chat to us, and that's probably in some ways the kind of the first point whenever you need to do that. This is our team, which is Jane, myself and Sue Hayes and Alex Huller. And here's the kind of contact details, but we'll be available in our cards for you to chat to us afterwards. But generally that's kind of how we start all our things, is that someone gives us a call, says I'm really excited about doing something within the city, and we start to unpack what that might mean in terms of what they might need to do. And just to give you an idea of what we do, so when you work with us on a public art commission, we will work alongside artists as needed throughout the process from the idea to installation. We'll assist with any negotiations with other City of Hobart units, and that can often be very daunting for people, so we help with that whole process. Or if it's private building owners, so we may contact private building owners on your behalf to see if we can broker relationships with them in order to understand whether they're willing to have a work on their property. We act as a representative and an advocate as needed on City of Hobart project team meetings. We offer advice as needed on design, fabrication, installation and communications of the work, which is often a very large part of the project. And we assist or support as needed with people to understand what the process is for the health and safety kind of component of it. So we make sure that you're safe and the rest of the public is safe while you're installing the work. And that's it. So end of the public art framework is sort of the last page, which Lynda pointed out today. She thought was the best page in a way, and she wanted to read that first and then go all the way back through, because it really says, you know, who am I? I'm an artist. What path do I take? I'm a community member. What path do I take? So it allows you kind of to understand how you might sort of speak with us. So that's me. Hopefully I didn't go over my 10 minutes. So next up in the program, you'll hear from 5 artists that are based in Tasmania and who work in a variety of mediums. So they're going to unpack, we particularly ask people to talk about process in this to really understand how you actually get this kind of work done. And we're presenting them in a Pecha Kucha style, so that's the framework of 20 sides for 20 seconds per side. And just to let you know that we've decided that it's probably more valuable for us to have one-on-one sessions at the end where you talk to various different groups about who will all be set up here, about your sort of questions or any ideas you had or any thinking or concerns or whatever it happens to be. We'll do that at the end rather than an open question session. So we'll go from, I'll sort of finish the evening and then we'll go into those sessions. So first up, if you give a warm welcome to Alex Miles, and I'll get her presentation.
My name's Alex Miles, and I design and manage creative projects for public spaces. My work's quite varied and responds to a range of briefs from interpretation design, place activation to permanent public artworks. I love public artwork that encourages response and interaction, and there's often an element of public participation in the works, the projects I work on. There's also always a team of people I work with. It changes from project to project, but usually includes a combination of engineers, makers, writers, and other designers and artists. So in Tassie, there's lots of opportunities for artists to create works for public spaces, so I'm always keeping my eyes open for new commissions. City of Hobart and Arts Tas both advertise opportunities regularly, and now and then private or corporate commissions come up too. So this evening I thought I'd focus on a project I worked on last year in South Hobart for the City of Hobart as part of the Resilient Hobart initiative. I'll break down my process and look at how I approach the creative and management aspects of the project. In May 2018, Hobart was impacted by an extreme weather event. The heavy rains affected many people, particularly those directly in the flood path along Hobart Rivulet. Artists were invited to submit expressions of interest to produce a public artwork that would commemorate the event as a place for contemplation and as a way to connect and strengthen the community. Shortlisted artists attended a community gathering where we were able to hear first-hand accounts of the flood and the months that followed as people recovered. It was really interesting to hear the different voices and perspectives in that first meeting. We also visited the proposed site at Hobart Linear Park. It's a long grassy area flanked on one side by the rivulet and a dramatic cliff face on the other. Looking west, there's views to the mountain. And at the height of the flooding, the park was completely underwater, where nearby houses and local businesses became some of the worst affected. Hearing the stories and standing in the foothills of the mountain, I began to think about how nature can offer us signs. I thought about how our shared experiences, combined with a closer connection to nature, can be a powerful way to build resilience. And so that sort of became the basis of my idea. The concept soon came together. A flock of black cockatoos swooping down the hill face at the cliff face to perch in the park below. Surrounding them, collected stories etched into the surface of existing stone fragments appearing to have washed down in the floods. But how would an artwork on a cliff face go over with the selection panel? So this is a snapshot of the presentation, and they liked it. So the next step was to design, develop, and plan. And I divided the project into two parts: a period of community engagement, where I invited residents to share their responses, and the physical construction of the sculptural elements. I hand-delivered project postcards to residents and asked local businesses to help by promoting the project and collect responses. We also set up a project page on the Council's Your Say website where people could contribute their stories and read others. One of the most original was a response set to a piece of Baroque lute music. The call for responses was open for about 6 weeks, and then to remind people the project was active, after a couple of weeks I installed a paste-up message on the side of Vinnie's on Macquarie Street, and then a couple of weeks later I started to post some of the responses in the windows of the vacant servo next door. At the same time, I was working on the development of design drawings and planning permissions. This stage involves consultation with a lot of different groups, so it's good to have an arts officer like Jude at Council to facilitate this and provide support. It was very important also to have the support of local climbers who use the nearby Freehof climbing wall. This is a basic design drawing for the perching bird. I usually provide drawings like this to manufacturers who then produce shop drawings for production. And an engineer then checks the design and provides details and certifications on footings and structure. But most important of all, I have to have a good relationship with the maker. For this project, Aircon Industries made the work, and their workshop, which was only 100 metres away from the location of the artwork, was completely trashed during the floods. So they really embraced this project and did amazing things with steel, bending it like paper. So taking a sketch and turning it into 3 dimensions sometimes requires a lot of trial and error. Perching bird was done twice, and the guys at Aircon, they were super obliging when I asked them to make changes to get the curves and angles correct. And the rock, by the way, was pulled out of the rivulet and been washed down as part of the debris. When it came to installing, Spider Tech did an amazing job lifting and manoeuvring the huge birds into place via a system of cables and pulleys. It looked like a big zip line and attracted lots of attention from people walking past. And the local ravens were also curious about the new arrivals. So with sculptural elements installed, I refocused on the collected community responses. I edited them down to excerpts that would work on the sandstone fragments. Stencils made from heavy-duty vinyl were applied to the surface and then sandblasted. Working with the existing landscaping around the work meant that I was able to ground the work in the space without the expense of additional landscaping at the end of the project. And a final push to the end meant site tidy, sign-off, maintenance requirements set, and then a couple of weeks later, a small launch for community and people who worked on the project. Since the work was installed, I've had people who contributed stories approach me to say how happy they were to see their responses incorporated into the work, and then others just to confirm the story of the black cockatoos. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a really lovely event. So to introduce myself, my name is Loren Kronemyer and I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. I moved to Perth in 2011 and now I live in Tasmania. I make large-scale live and participatory art in public space. Large scale to me means a rich investment in process, collaboration, and community. It doesn't necessarily mean that things are big and permanent. I work with practices of world building and anti-disciplinary thinking, which I think you'll get a sense of as I proceed what those mean. The project I was asked to discuss is called Mount Force, which was my first ever public art commission from the City of Perth in 2015. Mount Force was also my first major solo artwork. The work arose because I had a vision at the time. I was working at a nightclub and I would often see lines of drunk people being patrolled by the mounted police. I imagined a mounted police force carrying a third power animal, in this case a bird of prey, and I thought that that would be an appropriate response to this ephemeral public art commission. So the nature of the TransArt Ephemeral Art Commission was that it was run by the City of Perth for amounts of $10,000. I was so keen to receive this commission that by the time I proposed this project, it was the third time that I'd applied. In the aim of being useful to the people that are gathered here today, I'll tell you a lot about what that process looked like in the hopes that you find that information relevant. So the steps of this process were submitting my proposal, convincing the relevant people involved, including the cops, the people with the horses, the people with the birds, the city, budgeting, designing and planning the route and the process itself, executing the performance, debriefing, and then on. So I'm going to read a little bit, 10 seconds worth. Dear Selection Committee, I would like to propose the new work Mount Force to the City of Perth for the TransArt Experimental Program. This work is an ambitious, impactful, deeply thought out response to the call for stimulating artworks that coincide with the National Experimental Arts Forum. Mount Force involves creating several slight incursions into the reality of, that's all you get. So, this is what the budget for this project looked like. The birds were the most expensive, which makes sense. I also commissioned a local synth punk band to make a soundtrack for the work because the city said that they would like for it to have a more enduring impact, even though it's an ephemeral art commission. That was what the budget looked like. So overall, the first step was finding this bird person. So I contacted the WA Bird of Prey Association, which is a rescue for native birds, and she came around straight away. It was a cold call, but I'd been following her for about a year, and in fact the project was entirely designed so that I could reach out to this person. The second phone call that I made was at her suggestion was to a company called Aspiring Centaurs, which were these two equestrians that she knew through the medieval festival. Because they themselves were actually horseback archers who would dress in medieval kit and go shoot arrows at this medieval festival. But because of this, they were also really keen to be paid a nominal fee to engage with live birds. So everyone came around. The third call was to the police. They teased me for a while and were like, sure, we'll be involved, but they super didn't want to be involved. So fortunately, the City of Perth artist liaison, who's pictured there in the bucket hat, Ashley White, stepped in and allowed me to get permission to take the work to the public streets without police involvement. My role is that I was disguised as a jogger, and I would run 200 meters in front of the procession, making sure that no rowdy drunks or otherwise disruptive energies kind of got in the way or disturbed the birds, who were essentially the most precious members of the cast. So I was incognito, which meant that I got to hear a lot of the public response. My favorite one was someone eating brunch who just held the fork up to their mouth and then went, my other favorite was someone that said, "Oh yeah, that's to control the pigeons," like they knew what they were talking about. At no point did this artwork reveal that it was an artwork, which is something that's very much part of my process. It also accumulated lots of conversation online. At one point during my jog alongside the procession, I was chased down by a journalist who had to run alongside me in order to keep up to ask me questions. So overall, my dream came true. I got to hold an owl. I got to hang out with horses. The project was absolutely bringing together of people that never otherwise would have met. And it led to a lot of other explorations that were much more ambitious for me. So I was also asked to speak about another artwork of mine, which is a collaboration with my partner Ian Cyngler, who's another artist living in Sydney, and that's called Ecosexual Bathhouse. I was surprised they wanted me to talk about this because it's a little spicy, so prepare. This artwork is a much larger scale project. It was originally developed in 2015 and premiered in 2016 for Next Wave Festival, which is a festival based in Melbourne. And they have a program where they commission emerging artists with seed funding of $5,000. It seems like it's been more than 20 seconds. There we go. So Ian and I, this was our first time working together. We were trying to find a coming together of our respective practices, and the words ecosexual bathhouse sort of summarized what that was. I'll tell you about the project, but first I'll lay out that eventually, through lots of application stages, we amassed a great deal of funding and made the project a much larger scale than we had initially expected. So the work itself posits a sex club where participants can enter and engage in queer sex with the ecosystem itself. And so the audience become participants, the entire work is interactive, and it's scalable to various sizes. So this work has since gone on to tour to numerous contexts, including contemporary art festivals, but also public commissions from the city of Porto in Portugal, for example, and experimental contexts such as a presentation at an artist colony in Lithuania. So you can see that there's the original kind of sketches of how it would be, and then many photos of the different rooms that we ended up producing over the years. Overall, the ethics of my practice I wanted to summarize. Nothing about us without us, pay people, seek funding, invest in detail, pick up the phone, start from a place of desire, consider access, keep it ephemeral, adapt or die, care about your aftercare, and look after one another. And anything else you can ask me afterwards, so thank you very much.
Hello. I'd like to start by acknowledging we're meeting on Aboriginal land, to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that Aboriginal sovereignty was never ceded. My name's Rebecca Holmes. I'm here from Constance Artist Run Initiative, and I'd like to do a little shout out. Any other Constance board members in the room? Can you put your hand up? Whoop whoop. Thank you. So I'm here to talk about the evolution of the Open Space Public Art Project. Now, Open Space was an open call opportunity for an artist to present a temporary public artwork in a site of their choosing in Nipaluna. And that artist didn't need previous experience working in public space. So the project's actually now called Nayapi Niyakara. It's in partnership with the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre. It's still an open call opportunity, but it's an open call opportunity for an Aboriginal artist who lives in Lutruwita. So the current slide is a project called Circus. I'm taking everyone back to 2015, which was the first project that Constance presented after they closed the gallery in Goulburn Street. And it was also around about the time that I joined the board. And when I joined the board of Constance, I was particularly interested in working outside of that traditional gallery space. So not long after that project, we had a really big changeover in our board structure. So we went into 2016 with a bunch of newbies running the show, and we had all of the freedom to reimagine the organisation in our new off-site model. So in 2016, we presented this project that I see as a precursor to the open space project, and it was called Neither Here Nor There. It was in the pedestrian tunnels around Railway Roundabout. So the project had 6 artists. There were 3 Tasmanian artists and 3 mainland artists. They were paired, they'd never met before, and they were tasked with the job of creating site-responsive works in each of the tunnels. So 3 tunnels, 3 pairs of artists and 3 artworks. In hindsight, it was hugely ambitious. I'd never organised anything like it before, but fake it till you make it. So somehow we managed to pull it off, and we presented 3 vastly different projects. We got huge insight into how different types of projects work in public space. And how audiences interact with them as well. So there was one sculptural installation, there was one video installation that we had to set up every morning at 7 a.m. and then come back at night time and pack up around midnight. And there was an ephemeral and interactive work that people could come and activate, and then it would disappear and go on loop like that. Another important part that I wanted to note about this, and I suppose this comes into process, was this was a project that really enabled us to kind of start building a track record under our new operational model of presenting, engaging and accessible projects in public space. And that meant that we could then go on to support artists to also work in that way, and also to work in public space. So really us as a facilitator of artists to realise their ideas. So that leads me on to the open space project. At the heart of this project is the acknowledgement that artists can bring new perspectives to place, which we're all talking about a lot tonight, which is really exciting, and the effect that those works in public space can have on the way that we experience the spaces that are familiar to us. So as an organisation, we're in a position to be able to facilitate artists to do this, something that is often quite difficult for individual artists to go through a process on their own. But hopefully the new framework will change that. Sounds fantastic. So we presented the Open Space project over 2 years, in 2017 and 2018, and we had this great idea of it being an annual project. The first iteration of it in 2017 was called Lowland Grasslands, and we worked with an artist named Pip Jones who installed native grasses into the council planter boxes in the city. So the work was about land management and the fact that this area that we're in was a grassland prior to European invasion. So it was once full of native grasses, and those grasses are now under threat from development and colonising weeds. So through the project, Pip brought the grasses back to the city for about a month. So we spent quite a few 5 a.m. mornings following around a council truck, putting native grasses into planter boxes as they took out their, I think it was decorative kale. And then at the conclusion of that month-long project, 3/4 of the grasses thereabouts were given to the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre at Piura for revegetation projects. And the rest of them were given away to locals at the Farmgate Market, so they could go and plant them in their garden. And since this project, I've actually been contacted by a lot of people who have sent me photos of the grasses in their gardens. I still have some in mine as well. In 2018, which is the second iteration of Open Space, we had Tian Baker present Bliss Me. Tian's proposal was to investigate the nuances of Tasmanian's art industry. So she wanted to ask the question, how does art and tourism intertwine in the Hobart landscape? So for the project, she created a documentary-style video work through interviews with tourists and also locals who worked in the tourism and arts industry. And she housed that video in this shipping container, which was kind of pimped out as a kind of mock boutique tourism experience. It was down at Mawson's Place. So across those 2 iterations of the project, we learned a lot about the way that people engage with public artwork in spaces that are familiar with them. But after those two iterations, we kind of felt that we needed to revise it because something wasn't, it felt like it needed a bit of a kind of reformat, I suppose. And that was from an awareness that as a project that was seeking to engage with the context of this place through artist perspectives, we weren't reaching and therefore we weren't representing the voices of artists from the Aboriginal community. We just never received any applications. So we undertook a kind of process of consultation through the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre, through Denise Robinson at Arts Tasmania, through Riawana. We learnt so much. We reworked the project, reworked it again. We formed this partnership with the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre, and they worked to create a Palawakani title for the project, which is Nayapi Nikara, which means born to dream in Palawakani. And we did a call out last year. We have our artist, but we're actually announcing it next week, so I can't tell you, which is super exciting to be working with this amazing artist to present a project that's scheduled for May. And I think that's me. Thanks.
Hello, good evening, everybody. I feel like such an imposter. So, but hey, nothing ventured, nothing gained, let's go risky. I'm the black sheep, my name's Jane Longhurst. I'm an actor by trade and a broadcaster by accident. Okay. You'll be very familiar with images like this, possibly. This is the Theatre Royal. It's a nice, cosy, intimate theatre. I show it to you because it gives you an insight into how most audiences meet performing arts through comfort, comfortable seats, warmth, good toilets that flush, things like that. That's all provided for you if you work in a conventional theatre, along with a lot of cost. But never underestimate how hungry your audiences are for curiosity and stamina. At Gertrude Street Artist Space in the 1990s, I created a work that was performed 6:30 in the morning in winter, from Monday to Friday, and I had an audience every day of that particular week. So never underestimate how people are curious. Public art working can also always, for me, it's about the cracking idea, placing the faces of Lady Jane Franklin and Lenah on Craig Walsh's work, Digital Odyssey and 10 Days on the Island from a few years ago. It was a really wonderful experience. I played Lady Jane Franklin and Mirinda Sainty played Lenah. But sometimes the venue and location is so out of the box and so enticing that people will walk over broken glass to get there. This was up in the Dorney House, and this was a production of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf that did 2 sold-out repeat seasons, and I must say was one of the highlights of my career. But sometimes it's public art that discovers hidden gems, such as this one. This is the Gunpowder magazine. Joe Duffy, who was an AD of 10 Days on the Island from a few years ago, told me about this particular space, and even though I'm a Hobartian, I'd never heard of it, never been there. At the time, and this is like 2013, I was working with Salamanca Arts Centre's hybrid performance program, and through it I met Dylan Sheridan, who's a composer and sound artist. We went hunting and found it, and we were really intrigued. So the next step, because this was sort of around the time City of Hobart was acquiring this property, was to find out who the gatekeeper was, and that's that person on the right. Now, I can't stress enough how important it is to find the gatekeeper, because he literally opened the gate every day we worked there for the entire duration of a work we made called The Green Room. John Presser is his name. I made sure he was my best friend, because if he didn't like or trust what we were doing, we would never have been able to create this particular work, which was called The Green Room. We got funding support from the Australia Council and Salamanca Arts Centre, and what we tried to do in a very discreet 25-minute sound, light and performance was to literally reveal the incredible beauty of the interior of the Gunpowder magazine, built by convicts from local sandstone, extraordinary acoustic. It housed gunpowder up until the 1970s. So it's extraordinary to think that this was actually a venue that was kind of holding weapons of mass destruction right under our very noses. So again, it was an exciting co-creation that I was delighted to meet Dylan to create together. But also, curiously enough, also up on the Domain, anyone would think I live there, it was also the inspiration for another artist. This poor quality image shows you the Soldiers Memorial Avenue, which I'm sure some of you will be very familiar with. It intrigued a playwright from Sydney called Alana Valentine. She went for a walk on a visit to Hobart, and she was so struck with the power of these trees, that many of which had been planted sort of in 1918, post the First World War. And she then proceeded to pitch it to the Tasmanian Theatre Company, and a work was made. It was called Tree Widows. And it was based on verbatim theatre, which is where a playwright will research with the community and then through extra research, craft a text. So I show, again, another sort of semi-poor quality image, but to show you sometimes when I mention stamina, I mean stamina, because an audience will sometimes walk from tree to tree. We also provided a golf buggy, because I have a huge belief in the fact that you look after your audience and they will respond in kind. So we provided basic stools and performed in front of various trees, and we were sort of animating the stories of the people who were being remembered, either through contemporary people or people who knew the person through historical recount. It's very obscure sometimes. The person you were playing was sitting right in front of you. Last year, Junction Arts Festival and the Unconformity in Queenstown are also festivals that work very strongly with site responsive. And this is the Launceston Post Office, which is a work that I did last year with Jane Woolard. And the Launceston Post Office was formerly the site of a theatre. So that's what we made there. In 2018, I had the great fortune of being able to travel to New York to have a mentorship with the theatre ensemble there. And when I was there, I got to see this work. It's by screen actress performing Diane Wiest, Samuel Beckett's Happy Days. It was free and it was offered midday at the Madison Square Gardens. So later on this year, I'm going to be performing Happy Days, but I'm kind of shifting the concept and offering it at 6 different venues for free at 1 o'clock in November. So another thing about the offer and the gesture is, I think, the accessibility of what inspired me when I saw Diane Wiest offer it was that's what I'm looking to offer, including performing in this particular gallery at TMAG, also Salamanca Arts Centre's Kelly's Garden, St David's Cathedral, a couple of external sites as well. So it's a very quirky piece. It has great support from Liminal Studios, who are creating the designed costume, and it's going to scare the living daylights out of me because it's about 45 pages of text. But it'll only go for 45 minutes. Again, keep it compact, keep it friendly, look after your audience, and they will go anywhere with you if they trust you. So that's coming up in November. Happy Days by Samuel Beckett, presented by me in association with Blue Cow Theatre. So thank you very much for your attention. Look forward to chatting with you afterwards.
Hi, I'm Richie. I'd say I'll keep it short, but it's timed. Okay, so this is Airplay. That's Wes at the opening of our wind-powered sound sculpture installation, which I will talk about throughout the talk. So I should say thank you to Michael Edwards for auspicing the grant, and to Wes and the other performers. This is some of my work, if you don't know who I am. So this is a piece that was performed in Prague last year called Noosphere, which is an EEG live feedback performance. Okay, next slide. This is another one which is called Urban Oracle. It's a risograph print of the piece, which is kind of a Wi-Fi hotspot that tells you your future. So a lot of my work is very technical, with computers, data, electronics, etc. So I wanted to do something which engaged with Hobart's very familiar wind, and create a sound piece that was not so technical. So I'm going to try and talk about the process of realising this work through the Creative Hobart grant system. So this is the first prototype. We wanted to resonate metal with wind. I don't know if you've ever come across metal and wind, but it takes a lot of wind. So we sort of quickly realised that we needed to move to something a little bit more traditionally musical. So use piano wire. So I was working with another two makers in this, which is Guy Paramore and Pete Matilla, a woodworker and a metalworker. And so that was the last one was me learning how to wind a piano string. So this is the second prototype that Guy and I made in his workshop at DOT. And we were trying to sort of base this on aeolian harps, which are wind harps. And we then took it out into the field and found that it made a sound, but it was pretty limited. So we were sort of like, okay, what do we do? It was a really speculative proposal. I'd never made any kind of project like this, and neither had my collaborators, and it was funded anyway. So we had to come up with a site, and we talked about the domain, somewhere on the domain. Can I just say, if you're looking at public sites, the List Maps website is very, very useful, especially if you need to dig or figure out what services are there, because the council will expect you to do that. Okay, so I started working with Joe Shrimpton. So I should have thanked Joe at the top of this talk, because this project would not have happened without Joe. So basically I had a woodworker and a metalworker, but I needed an instrument builder. And so luckily I met one who wanted to work with me, and we started, and Joe built a prototype based on sort of ideas and our meetings, and then we started to build these sculptures, and it was a lot of building. So that's me grinding screws. Did anyone see the work? It was down near the bike path at the cenotaph, kind of, yeah. So there's a few of these. There's 6 of these. So each time we built one, we sort of reiterated the process from the initial prototype. We changed the frame, the structure. We thought about how the strings would be used, how it would play. So that's sort of the whole lot. Basically, if you haven't seen it, it's a series of 6 pieces, including the giant one on the left, which is the base, and through a system of wind turbines, which Joe designed and were 3D printed. All the wood was hand cut, hand measured and handmade by the 2 of us. The plucking system we also designed and reiterated through 3D printing. We probably so this is sort of an initial process. We got a medium grant for the project. I suppose I should keep moving on. So the idea was for the pieces to be interactive and for people to be able to hear them, to have an acoustic sort of spatialised sound. So the bass one, if you're small, you can get into it. Otherwise you can just put your head into it. But we had a whole bunch of hurdles. So our first soft launch was in the yard at Joe's workshop, which is also his house at the time. And because we did not have permission to put it in public space, we had to have an engineer come and have a look at the work. And so I suppose maybe the circles on this poster for the actual launch represent the hoops that we jumped through. And so we had an engineer who came and told us that they were good and there was no problem, but we needed to have his certification, and there were no laws around public sound sculptures, but we still needed to have his certification. So that's us being safe at the bump in. And which we were very safe, and no one got harmed in the making of any of this, or the installing, or the life of the work. So this is Danny Kirby singing at the opening. So yeah, Wes and Danny, Matt Ward, and Julia Druin all played, which was great. And this is a very quick presentation, but the one thing I wanted to say was those pluckers tended to break the things that actually made the sculptures make sound. So this is a public intervention that occurred where someone had stuck a flower into our plucker, which is like really exactly what I wanted out of this work, to put it into a public space where people who didn't normally come across art would be engaged with it. And they did, and I mean, when we visited and we had to do maintenance and all kinds of things, we found that people were really engaged with it. And the work will now go on to the art farm. Thanks.
Okay, so we're almost at the last part of the evening, where everyone can move to the tables to have a chat to people. But before we do that, thank you so much to the 5 speakers who just spoke, and to Lynda as well. It was a really fantastic set of kind of discussions about what sort of things you can do, and hopefully it sort of tickles the edges of what starts to sort of build some momentum in Hobart. And has, hopefully, Richie pointed it out, but hopefully starts to have much smoother processes for artists working in that way, so it doesn't feel like you're jumping through hoops. So can I get everyone to thank the speakers again for their fantastic chats? So all of the artists here tonight will be part of the tables here at the back for chats as you need, and we also have Arts Tasmania, the public art programs, Constance Ari, so Rebecca's already chatted, so Constance Ari crew will all sit together and have a chat to whoever wants to. Johnny is here talking about the Vibrance Festival, and we'll obviously be here as well on the table just over here on the right to chat to anyone who wants to talk about anything they're interested in doing in the city. So thanks again everyone for coming along. Please make sure you have a drink and something to eat and just enjoy having a good discussion. Thank you.